So a few months ago, I made a video on Life is Strange and giving a response to ER's criticism of the original game. And after making that video, I decided to play Before the Storm for the first time. I have very mixed feelings about it, so I'd like to talk about what I think works and what doesn't. I've broken this video down into several parts. So first we're going to talk about the history behind the game to give ourselves a little bit of context as to what's going on. After that, I'm going to have a brief story overview for those who haven't played the game before. Then I'm going to discuss the two major flaws that I see in Before the Storm. And after that, I'm going to talk about what the game gets right, in my opinion. So let's set the stage. The year is 2015, and Donut Entertainment releases Life is Strange episodically throughout the first half of the year. It sells over 1 million copies before the last episode had even shipped. So it's a huge success for them, considering it's only their second game, and their first game, Remember Me, had such mediocre sales it nearly put them into bankruptcy. Donut hit their stride with Life is Strange, and now they had a shiny, new and valuable IP on their hands. Square Enix, who published the game, is also aware of this. Meanwhile, another game studio by the name of Idle Minds have been busy working on StoryForge, a toolkit comprised of two programs. The first program is Screenplay, which allows for the writing of non-linear scripts, and the second being Storyteller, which pulls these scripts into a game engine that can be used to animate scenes. Square Enix can't help but notice the work that Idle Minds is doing, and after they put two and two together, they realized that Idle Minds would be a perfect fit to work on a spin-off for Life is Strange. They ask the studio to make Before the Storm, which Idle Minds gladly accepts, and they begin work on the game in 2016. Most of the voice cast from the original game return to reprise their roles, with the major exception being Ashley Birch, who voiced Chloe in the original game. She stays on as a story consultant, but the voice of Chloe is instead done by Rihanna DeVries. The reason behind Ashley Birch's absence is due to a video game voice actor strike that took place between 2016 and 2017. We fast forward to 2017, and Idle Minds renames themselves to Deck 9, and just 1 month later, they announced Life is Strange Before the Storm. The first episode of the game is released in August, with the second and third episodes releasing in the same year. The game receives favourable reviews and is overall seen as a success, with Deck 9 breathing one huge sigh of relief. So let's quickly go over the story. If you're already up to speed with what happens in the game, feel free to skip this part. Our protagonist is Chloe Price, Max's best friend from the original game. Before the Storm is a prequel that takes place 3 years before the events of Life is Strange. So Max is in Seattle, and Chloe is left in Arcadia Bay with no one but her mother Joyce, since her dad William died in a car crash 2 years ago. The first episode starts with Chloe going to a concert at an old mill. She gets herself into trouble with a few sketchy dudes, but is saved by Rachel Amber, the popular girl at Blackwell Academy, which is Chloe's school. The next day, Chloe ponders over the events of the previous night, as she had never once talked to Rachel Amber before, and was surprised to have even seen her at the concert. Chloe has a small argument with her mother over breaking curfew, and to Chloe's discontent, she is driven to school by David Madsen, Joyce's boyfriend who Chloe intensely dislikes. We also have our first dream sequence involving Chloe and her father here, something that reoccurs throughout the series. Once Chloe arrives at school, she bumps into Rachel Amber again, who is practicing her role as Prospera in the school play. After the two hit it off discussing the concert from the previous night, Rachel asks Chloe to tag along with her and ditch school, to which Chloe agrees. They hitch a ride on a train and they start to bond, with Chloe learning that Rachel's father is a district attorney. The two disembark from the train and continue their adventure at an overlook, where they spy on people passing by through a viewfinder. After spotting a couple kissing, Rachel becomes visibly upset, leaving Chloe confused as to why. They continue onto a junkyard where Chloe confronts Rachel about it, and in a fit of anger, Rachel calls Chloe selfish and leaves, despite Chloe's attempts to remedy the situation. An enraged Chloe then takes a bat to the junkyard, eventually finding the wreckage of her father's car. After another dream sequence with her father, she runs into Rachel, who confesses that the reason she was angry was because the couple they saw earlier was in fact Rachel's father and a strange woman that Rachel had never seen before.
You remember that guy that we saw under this tree with that woman?
The ones who were making out?
That was my dad.
Oh, all right.
And that woman was definitely not my mom.
Oh.
The two come to an agreement that they both want to leave Arcadia Bay behind, and upon burning a photo of her father, Rachel then knocks over a trash can, which sets fire to the surrounding forest. Episode 2 starts in the principal's office, where Chloe and Rachel are being punished for their truancy. Chloe's mother Joyce is disappointed, and in the parking lot she tells Chloe that David is moving in. Chloe despises this and storms off to the junkyard, where she spots a truck that's broken down but fixable. During this time, she gets a call from her drug dealer Frank, who wants to meet up later in the day, and Chloe agrees to this. After several attempts to get the truck working, Chloe falls asleep, where a nightmare sequence with her father takes place.
Fire blinds us, just like darkness. But darkness blinds with absence, with loss.
What does fire blind with?
Beauty.
She is woken by Rachel, and the two briefly discuss the events of the past few days, before Rachel leaves to rehearse for the school play, which is taking place the same night. Chloe then spots Frank's RV and notices the same mysterious woman who she spotted with Rachel's dad leaving it. Upon entering the RV, Frank tasks Chloe with collecting drug money from Drew North, a Blackwell student. She agrees, and Frank drops Chloe off at the school so she can carry out the job. After Chloe enters Drew's room at the school dormitories and successfully finds the money, a man called Damon Merrick tries to get into Drew's room. We learn that Frank is working for Damon and that he has come by himself to get his drug money. Damon then seriously injures either Drew or his little brother Mikey, with Chloe managing to remain unhurt. We cut to later in the evening when the school play is about to take place, and the drama teacher announces that Juliet Watson, one of the actors, is unable to make it. Rachel nominates Chloe as a substitute for the role, to which Chloe reluctantly accepts. Chloe's scene on stage with Rachel operates smoothly enough until Rachel suddenly goes off script and asks Chloe to run away with her while still remaining in character. Chloe retains her composure and agrees. After the play, the two discuss it further, with Chloe initially remaining hesitant. Rachel eventually persuades Chloe to leave Arcadia Bay with her that night. They both head to Rachel's house to pick up a few things, but are called by her parents James and Rose Amber, who insist that Chloe stay for dinner. Tensions start to rise at the dinner table when Rachel's father James starts talking about the importance of family. And after reaching critical mass, Rachel and Chloe tell James they saw him with a mysterious woman at the Overlook. The episode ends on a cliffhanger when James states that the mysterious woman is actually Rachel's biological mother. Episode 3 is the final episode, and it begins with James explaining everything. He tells both Rachel and Chloe about the mysterious woman called Sarah, who is Rachel's real mother. Him and Sarah were partners and had Rachel together, but Sarah started to abuse drugs and became extremely unstable. James was deeply in love with her, but ultimately made the choice to stop Sarah from seeing her daughter Rachel in an attempt to keep her safe. For 15 years, he's been paying Sarah monthly to not contact or attempt to seek out Rachel. Rachel is shattered by this and retreats upstairs to her room. Chloe comforts her, and after the two discuss it, Rachel decides that she wants to meet Sarah. That night, Chloe has another nightmare with her father, this one more intense than the previous few.
Relax, sweetie. It's all pretend, right?
Right.
Just a bit of stage magic. Floodlights, sound effects. Chloe, look at me. Look at me, sweetheart. It's going to be okay.
The next morning she returns home and calls Frank in an attempt to set up a meeting with Sarah at the junkyard. Frank agrees to meet Chloe along with Rachel in a few hours' time. After heading downstairs to grab a toolbox from the garage to repair the truck at the junkyard with, Chloe bumps into David and her mother making breakfast. The three make an effort to reach an understanding with each other before Chloe heads off for the junkyard. At the junkyard, Chloe successfully repairs the truck and meets Rachel, who is ready to see Sarah. The two are greeted by Frank and unexpectedly Damon Merrick, but no Sarah. An altercation between the two parties breaks out with Damon grabbing Chloe. Rachel retaliates by hitting Damon with a wooden plank, and Damon stabs Rachel with a knife. Frank turns against Damon and holds him off, allowing Chloe to drive a bleeding Rachel to the hospital. They reach the hospital in time, and Rachel's condition becomes stable. Chloe confesses to Rachel's father James that they tried to meet Sarah. He is not angered by this, and is instead grateful to Chloe for saving his daughter. Chloe talks alone with Rachel in the hospital room, and Rachel admits that despite the events that just took place, she still wishes to meet Sarah. She tasks Chloe with going to James's office at the Amber residence to see if she can find any way of contacting Sarah. After investigating James's office, Chloe finds a phone with a single contact who is revealed to be Damon Merrick, and that James is working with him in some way. Damon knows Sarah's location, and Chloe poses as James through text to convince Damon to tell her where Sarah is. After Chloe burns evidence belonging to Damon and naming a snitch, Damon texts her that Sarah is being kept at the old mill, and demands that Chloe bring a stack of cash in James's office as payment for his services. Chloe hurries to the old mill in her truck, and after nearly hitting a passing vehicle, she briefly stops on the side of the road to collect her thoughts. She begins thinking of her own father, and whether or not he may have lied to her about her life.
I suppose everyone lies about big things. I mean, the stuff Mom doesn't know about me. So you probably lied too.
After reaching the old mill, Chloe heads inside to see Sarah tied up with Damon, prepared to dose her with drugs. This is implied to threaten Sarah's life, as it's revealed she has been clean of all drugs for over a year. Chloe attempts to intervene but is knocked down by Damon, and the last thing she sees is Frank entering the mill and fighting Damon before she passes out. When she awakens, there is only an untied Sarah left in the mill. Sarah tells Chloe that Frank has taken care of Damon and that she doesn't have to worry about him anymore. She then insists to Chloe that she can never let Rachel know about James's plan to have Damon drug Sarah, and that Rachel should never meet her. She explains that if Rachel found out that her father had lied to her about this, she would never be able to love her father again, and it would essentially ruin Rachel's family relationship.
What Rachel needs, though, is not to have her father taken away from her.
He doesn't
It's
deserve...
not about James. It's not about me, and it's not about you. It's about Rachel. Tell her what James did, and you'll be killing him for her. You understand that, don't you? You lost your father. Do you really want to put Rachel through that?
Chloe takes this into consideration, and when she returns to visit Rachel in the hospital, the final choice of the game is to either tell Rachel everything about her father's plans, or to lie and cover it up to protect her. The game then closes with a small montage of Chloe and Rachel spending their time together, before Rachel's phone is seen in the dark room from the original game. So, let's talk about why I think the game is flawed. While Before the Storm got generally positive reviews, the game was not as well received as Life is Strange, and I think most of the problems with the game can be boiled down to two core issues. The first being its nature as a prequel game, and the second being that Chloe is our protagonist. I'm going to expand on both of these, but let's talk about prequels first. If I asked you to name a sequel of a movie that was just as good, if not better than the original, then there'll likely be a few that start to pop into your head. Terminator 2, Empire Strikes Back, Aliens. Now, if I ask you to name a prequel that was just as good, if not better than the original, you might start to struggle, and there's a couple of reasons for that. When you write a prequel, you have to go into it aware that the audience will essentially already know the ending of your narrative from the start if they've watched the original. In the Star Wars prequels, we already know where everything is headed from the moment we begin watching. Order 66 will be carried out, Anakin will become Darth Vader, and Obi-Wan will beat him. This kills a lot of the suspense that writers could possibly get from a story, and ultimately it means that it's not as exciting as it could be. Imagine if before watching Avengers Infinity War for the first time, you knew that not only Thanos would successfully pull off the snap, but also knew every single person that he kills with it. There'll still be plenty of intense moments throughout the movie, and you'll have a fun time, but knowing the ending detracts from it no matter what. In the case of Before the Storm, we already know that Rachel will go missing and die, because we're made aware of that in the first game. The lead writer of Before the Storm, Zach Garish, was aware of this issue, and he talked about it in a 2017 interview at Gamescom.
It's, so I think there are pros and cons to it, for sure.
Pros, pun intended.
Pros and, yeah. Yeah. So, well, on the one hand, the characters that Don't Nod created with the first Life is Strange are so amazing. Getting to tell a story within that universe and with those people, that's a gift. That's really fun. On the other hand, you're right, the canon that's created and that's established in what's essentially the future for Before the Storm is known, right? There's certain facts that we know about that story. We chose deliberately to situate our narrative 3 years before the events of the first game to carve out a space so that even the most diehard fans of Season 1, they won't know the ending of Before the Storm. They're not going to know where it's going to go because this isn't the story of Rachel Amber's disappearance. It's a different story. It's a mystery that we don't want to spoil too much about at this stage.
This is honestly a great answer to the problem, and it makes the best of a bad situation. It could have been a lot worse if Deck 9 instead made the story more focused on the disappearance of Rachel Amber, because we already know so much of where that story leads. Instead, we have an entirely different narrative that we previously had no idea about, which remedies the issue about as well as anything could. We do know that Rachel will die, so there is a looming sense of dread throughout the game, but Deck 9 do the best they can to combat it. The other complication with prequels is that they inherently limit what a writing team can do with its characters. Since we understand their traits and personalities from the original work, they can never go past that or change in a different way. In Before the Storm, this means that Chloe can never get along with David, and she has to retain that rebellious, fiery spirit that we know from the first game. If they had made a direct sequel to Life is Strange, Chloe might have changed to become more understanding or less tempered, but with a prequel, Chloe can't change to be anyone other than who we already know her to be in the first game. It's a major problem when you're limited by how your protagonist can grow and change, because character development is basically the bread and butter of almost any narrative. Unlike the previous problem, there isn't any solution to this that doesn't involve using entirely new characters, so Deck 9 couldn't really write their way around it. They attempt their best to have Chloe empathize with David, I would say even more so than the original game does, but due to that limitation, Chloe simply can't reach an understanding with him because that's not where she is as a person yet. The second major issue that I see with Before the Storm is the fact that we play as Chloe Price. In my previous video, I touched on an overarching problem in narrative-based games. Funnily enough, an inherent flaw in the episodic narrative genre is that we have to play as a character and make choices for them that reflect our own beliefs and values, which means that the character has to be rather generic so everyone can see a part of themselves in the protagonist. If they have too much of their own personality, then a percentage of the player base is being cut off from the outset because they don't agree with who they're playing as. This is relevant to Before the Storm because, unlike Max, Chloe has an extremely distinct and specific personality. She's rebellious, doesn't follow rules, and has trouble connecting deeply with others due to past trauma. As a character, she's perfectly fine, but it becomes a complication when we have to play as her because not everyone relates to Chloe. A lot of people won't empathize with her or understand why she makes the decisions that she makes, but regardless, we are forced to make those decisions for her. To boil it down, a lot of the time, you might not want to take either of the choices available to Chloe because you don't agree with any of them. This happened countless times for me where the choice that I personally would make in Chloe's situation isn't an available choice to make because that's simply not who Chloe is. And there's nothing that breaks the immersion more than when you disagree with your own character that you're playing as. Chloe's character works in the original game because we are witnessing all of her decisions from a third-person perspective, so we don't feel personally responsible if she makes a decision that we don't agree with. Max is much more of a blank slate where the choices available to her are often ones that you would personally take yourself. This is why Max is overall more relatable than Chloe to most people, because she is written to be that way. There will of course be a portion of the player base that does deeply identify with Chloe, because they may have experienced some of the hardships that she has, but that portion of the player base is a minority, and making Chloe the playable character excludes everyone else. Deck 9's only solution to this is sometimes they'll simply not give you a choice at all when Chloe does something that is egregiously different to what the player would do, and you know that it's a blatant flaw in your game that you have to remove the interactivity from an interactive story for it to work. If Before the Storm was simply a TV series instead, it would work fine, but when you're creating a piece of media that boasts about having player choice, you need to make your protagonist someone who makes choices that your player would make. In The Wolf Among Us, Bigby Wolf works because even though he is seen as a reckless detective that is feared by a lot of people, you have so many opportunities to be lenient or forgiving, even if it comes back to bite you. In The Walking Dead, Lee works because you can choose to side with different parties in the group throughout the game, depending on who you agree more with. The player's agency is imperative in games like these, and Deck 9's neglect of it was a key factor in why Before the Storm didn't feel quite as impactful as Life is Strange did.
Don't you just feel like everything's possible?
So we've talked about the problems in Before the Storm. Now let's talk about what Deck 9 got right, because they got a whole damn lot right with this game. We'll take a quick break from narrative talk to discuss a little bit about the technical side of the game. Deck 9 were really lucky to be in the position to work on Before the Storm because the majority of textures and environments were already created in the original game, which means they could redirect their time elsewhere polishing other aspects. One of the most noticeable differences is the giant step up in animation. The movements of the characters' mouths when speaking is a lot more pronounced than in the original, where it often looked very locked down. During dialogue, their jaw wouldn't open very much, but in Before the Storm you can visibly see an improvement. Body animations are given more care as well. A lot of the movement feels much more natural and fluid, and less robotic than the first game. Chloe's walking and running animations have a cool sort of swagger to them that really looks like how Chloe would walk. It's a minor thing, but it's great to see that Chloe has her own unique movement animations that complement her personality. It really does make her more human. In Before the Storm, Deck 9 also introduced a new dialogue mechanic called Backtalk, where Chloe can persuade others in her favour if she passes a series of dialogue options correctly to insult or make comebacks to what they say. There are certainly times where some of the writing for the Backtalk is pretty lackluster, but I really love that they added this mechanic in. Not only is it something unique to Chloe's character that makes it more fun to play as her, but also anything that a developer does to try and innovate the dialogue in these narrative games is welcomed by me. It's exciting starting a backtalk challenge because you really have to pay attention to what the other characters say and react accordingly to be rewarded, otherwise you risk failing it. Detroit Become Human had a similar sort of system with the stress meter during an interrogation, where you need to choose the right dialogue options in the moment to successfully interrogate an android. Systems like these are great because usually the repercussions to your choices don't occur until later on down the line, but with Backtalk there is this strong sense of immediacy that can be really thrilling. I really just welcome any sort of experimentation with dialogue mechanics in narrative-based games, so I'm glad that Deck 9 added this in, even if it sometimes falls flat. There are a lot of small touches that add up to make a difference in the game too, like your current objective being written down on your hand, and being able to choose several different outfits throughout the game. Characters will even comment on your choice of attire.
Your shirt looks like the tea leaves they used to tell people's fortunes.
How's my future looking?
Bright and sunny.
They're little details, but really nice to see there because it makes us feel like Deck 9 has passion for this world. And anything that gives the game a stronger sense of personality is fantastic. Shifting back to narrative details, Deck 9 actually packed a lot under the hood that genuinely convinces me that the story of Before the Storm might be superior to Life is Strange in my opinion. Taking on Rachel Amber as a character would have been one of the most daunting aspects of creating the game for Deck 9. In the original game, she has this almost mythical nature where we never come into direct contact with her, but she's connected with the story at every point in the game. Max puts it best when she says that she feels like Rachel is guiding her and Chloe to the answer.
And even though I don't know her, it feels like Rachel is guiding us to the truth.
Chloe's descriptions of Rachel are also obviously biased, as she makes Rachel sound like the most incredible person on the planet. To be able to distill all of this into a character that can live up to the hype while still remaining grounded in reality is a monstrous undertaking, but Deck 9 somehow managed to pull it off. From our first few interactions with Rachel alone, we can already see why Chloe idolizes her. Rachel acts as a savior to Chloe the very first time they meet when she rescues her from the sketchy patrons at the old mill. This would almost seem like a dream to Chloe, spending the night rocking out with the perfect popular girl at Blackwell. She even says to herself that she can hardly believe it really happened.
That really was Rachel Amber. And she saved my life. How was last night even real?
Before she can even become accustomed to the events of last night, she bumps into Rachel again, who whisks her away to the drama room. Chloe throughout all of this is bewildered, and she is not used to feeling that way at all. When Rachel asks her to ditch school for a train ride, Chloe is thrown off entirely, but agrees. She is barely keeping up with Rachel's spontaneity, but is nonetheless enjoying this unique new experience. For the first time in a long time, she has met someone who makes her nervous.
Is this nervousness? Is that what this feeling is? Wish Max were here, so I could ask.
So far, this Rachel that we know is everything we've heard from Chloe in the original game. Mysterious, incredible, a near mythical character. When Rachel's mood turns for the worst, however, we see that she is absolutely not the impeccable and flawless girl we expected, but rather she is damaged almost as much as Chloe was by the loss of her father. It's at this point where the real Rachel emerges. Not a paragon of perfection, but a hurt girl who needs Chloe just as much as Chloe needs her. A mutual relationship where both rely on the other. And through this, Rachel becomes more than an idealized icon. She becomes understandably human.
Chloe, I owe you an apology.
Hey, we were both kind of the queen of shitty.
No, I mean it. Whatever's going on between us, it's intense and new and awesome, and you had the courage to tell me that you feel it too. And I treated you like shit.
Courage? I don't know if I'd call it that. More like blind desperation. And maybe a slight buzz from that wine.
I just want you to know I'm lucky that you were with me today. You're a badass, Chloe Price.
What?
Remember that biker asshole who wouldn't let you into the mill? You talked your way right past him.
You saw that?
And those skeevy douchebags who followed you upstairs? 2 against 1. But you wouldn't take any shit from them.
I'd be dead if you hadn't thrown that bottle.
You inspired me.
For Deck 9 to nail all this down in the first episode alone is incredible. Trying to successfully pull off Rachel's character was an unbelievably difficult task, but they somehow found a way. Moving on to themes, I really like the overarching subject matter of lies and grief that were woven into the game, and specifically exploring whether or not it's ethical to lie to a loved one if it means you protect them from a harmful truth. It feels a lot more focused than Life is Strange in this regard, because we see people lying through the entire game, so the message is revisited several times, each time digging just a little bit deeper into the moral dilemma than the last. This is also used to further explore Chloe's relationship with her father, where she starts to realize that even though she idolizes him, he more likely than not lied to her about important things in her life. To put it more simply, she comes to an understanding that he might not have been the perfect father that she imagined, but it's still possible to love him nonetheless.
I used to think my dad was perfect. But now I realize he was probably just as messed up as everyone. And it doesn't make me love him any less.
This is a really fantastic move by Deck 9 to flesh out her father in this fashion, because it points out a flaw in the original game that Chloe believes her real father to be perfect in every way, and her stepdad to be the worst guy in the world, when things are obviously never that straightforward. Seeing David with Joyce in episode 3 was really impactful, because it forces Chloe to rethink her assumptions about people. The sort of nuance and depth being inserted into pre-existing characters to further expand them is honestly great, and I'm incredibly glad that Deck 9 put in the effort to make this shine through when they easily could have gotten away with just abusing people's nostalgia of the original game. Chloe's father isn't the only side character that we revisit in Before the Storm either. Younger versions of Nathan and Victoria also make an appearance. Nathan is fleshed out a lot more like I wanted him to be in the original game, so I'm glad to see some backstory added behind his downfall, although the repercussion to that is that Victoria's character is given less screen time and becomes much more shallow to us as a result. One last thing to add that I think they improved over the original game is the final choice you have to make. It was more difficult for me to decide between lying or telling Rachel the truth compared to sacrificing Chloe or Arcadia Bay in the original game. It purely comes down to personal opinion, but I think that the conclusion to Before the Storm generates much more interesting discussion than the conclusion to Life is Strange. Delving into the ethics and morals of lying is really fascinating and worth talking about. Despite Before the Storm being a frustrating game at times, I'm still really glad it was made. I'd probably pin it on Square Enix, who likely wanted to make another Life is Strange game without fully understanding why a prequel starring Chloe Price wouldn't work. Deck 9 couldn't really afford to turn down the opportunity to work on such a big IP either, so I don't blame them for its faults. Honestly, I think Deck 9 did a near perfect job considering the restrictions they had to meet. A prequel with Chloe could have gone horrendously, but they really pulled through and did justice to the series. In 3 episodes alone, they accomplished not only portraying Chloe and Rachel's relationship, but also making Rachel's character live up to the hype, adding nuance to Chloe's relationship with her father, exploring what it means to lie to loved ones, and a lot more. I'm keen to see what Deck 9 creates next, because despite its flaws, Before the Storm is a wonderful entry into the Life is Strange series, and I'm glad to have played it. That's all I have for this video. Thank you very much for watching.
Thy liberty? Nay, this most of all I will not grant.
That's not her line. Is it? What's going on?
But thou assured my freedom, didn't thou? I never said how dearly I hold thee. My habit's been to keep my soul well draped. Most loyal spirit, companion, and friend, is acting in my service not replete with excitement, amusement, and delight?
Of course, mistress. Most truly it is so.
Mr. Keat, they're way off script. It's magical.
Then why, I pray you, wish you to be free? Excitement's a mere counterfeit of bliss. These storms and these adventures, I prefer to know thou still cared for my plainest self. I have thee in my grasp. I will not bend. I will not see thee flying forth alone. The envy would be more than I could bear. So come with me. Is that not in thy power? Spirit, take my hands. Most faithful friend, for but a little longer I beseech. Continue in thy service to my schemes, and when they are complete, I swear to thee, we shall fly beyond this isle. The corners of the world are mere prologue. I'll seek to make thy happiness so great that e'en the name of liberty's forgot. What sayest thou to my most hopeful wish?
Say yes!
Yes, I am most pleased. Your duty done for now, so go forth hence with haste. I've work to do.
No, 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 no.